Throughout this film, we've covered a lengthy time span in the 1990s, and it's vital to helping understand what the problems really are and what ones will continue to lay ahead. And separate from the focus of physical cover-ups that the truth movement seems only obsessed with, these crimes are still connected, even systemically, and it shows how the branch-out effect of operatives between 9/11 and 1993 is real. That's why it's important to understand or to have a basic grasp not just about the atrocities of terrorist incidents committed or the pretext being used or attempted, but the historical efforts of prevention by anti-terrorism task force, even if such focus seems to emphasize the bottom end of a great conspiracy. Most 9/11 truthers are oblivious to official narratives of these crimes, just as much as they are being indoctrinated in a cult conspiracy worldview that they'll even deny or doubt its popularity subjectively. And in that subversive mind frame that the truth movement has been emotionally attached to, combined with being ignorant of the Middle East and real foreign policy, they are afraid of falling under a spell of pro-war propaganda, along with being disillusioned by their fantastical expectations that they have been long misled into believing are the ulterior conspirators behind 9/11, and not bothering to investigate the validity of Al-Qaeda or Islamic terrorism as a shift or trend throughout the Arab and Third World. A prime example ignored, ending the 90s era, is the Millennium Plot, as in what almost occurred during the 2000 New Year's Y2K celebrations, not just up into the Canadian border with Ahmed Rassam and those linked to him in New York City and elsewhere in the US, but also other Millennium incidents that did actually take place in South Asia and the Middle East then, and since then post 9/11, into now what's further escalated with 3 administrations later continuing the unending mess with the war on terror. And what about the 1980s? Was there ever an earlier warning sign of attacking the World Trade Center back then? What was the US's approach on dealing with international terrorism? Was there ever a call for the war on terrorism then, such as the failed war on drugs? How about Europe back then? Where did Islamic terrorism exist? Was there another underground network like Al-Qaeda that predates it? Why did the 1986 West Berlin discotheque bombing happen? Was Libya really responsible? How was ISIS able to manifest in Libya a decade after 9/11 while there had been an ongoing coalition with the war on terrorism? Who was Abu al-Zarqawi? And how did he just all of a sudden appear in Iraq, ultimately becoming another pretext for the 2003 US invasion? And why also did he behead Nick Berg? Why did Osama bin Laden really move to Sudan in 1992? Who is Gulbuddin Hekmatyar? And why did he become one of the first suspects for the 1993 World Trade Center bombing? And why isn't there any effort to capturing Ayman al-Zawahiri, who still roams free?
Look hard, Marty! Who? Who do you think? The Libyans!
Isn't there something to be said about how just within less than 15 years, the US went from Muammar Gaddafi as Arab villain, then on to Saddam Hussein as Arab villain, and then on to Osama bin Laden, but then back to Saddam, and then back to Gaddafi? Especially when Libya issued the first arrest warrant through Interpol against bin Laden on March 16, 1998, naming him as the main suspect in the murder of 2 German citizens in Libya in 1994. This all before the US issued their bin Laden arrest warrant months later for conspiracy to attack defense utilities of the United States. And what about the 70s? Who the hell was Carlos the Jackal? What was the Black September? What ultimately was the consequence of Munich in 1972? Why does this kind of activity go back to Germany so much? These historical questions, not only pertaining to the pre- and post-bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993, do have somewhat useful information, but they have not been thoroughly challenged within the mainstream alternative conspiracy theories or within established 9/11 truth movements when scrutinized over its popular inside job claims, in sequential contrast to 9/11 itself, when the attacks were certainly carried out on the surface definitively by a loose association of Arabs and or individuals who identify as Muslims within a conventional Al-Qaeda nexus. And even given positions of deniability by feds doesn't make it a default reason to grant collusion accusation or suggest government conspiracies and or domestic complicity, but instead can also be more to do with neglect and compartment conflicts as well as covering up their own mistakes. But none of these obstructions, given along with real anomalies still showing cover-ups, detracts that these crimes were not carried out by an ulterior international conspiracy. In other words, what Alex Jones has proclaimed for decades, misguided by those discredited sources that even predate him, in that the 1993 World Trade Center bombing was an inside job, or in his definition of a false flag, is utter nonsense.